morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Raincoast Field School at Home. Hello to all of our returning listeners today who enjoyed our video last week. Wasn't it awesome? The intertidal ecosystem is so cool. And you know what? I don't think I'm done learning about it. So we should probably grab our friend Stef and maybe our buddy Mark and jump back in the field. I hope you guys enjoy this week's video. Alright guys, so we are back in the field. And remember, last week when we were in the intertidal zone, we really focused on those harsh environmental factors that a lot of the species here have to live with. So remember we talked about things like really heavy wave action, hot temperatures, different salinity changes. So all of these things we discussed last week. But this week, we are going to change gears a little bit and we are going to focus on the biotic factors of this environment. Does anybody know what the term biotic means? How about we explain this a little bit more?
An ecosystem is made up of two types of things that are abiotic and things that are biotic. Abiotic factors are things that are not living. We talked about these last week. Do you remember some examples? We talked about temperature. Warm temperatures from the sun and cold temperatures from the water are not living. So they are abiotic factors. The saltiness of the water, salinity, and waves are also abiotic factors. What about biotic factors? If something is a living thing, it is biotic. Animals and plants are biotic because they are alive. They have cells and DNA, and they use energy to grow and reproduce. What in this photo is biotic? Here we can see anemones, a sea star, and surf grass. They are all alive, and so they are all biotic factors.
So Taylor, you know so many different species now, and as humans we like to group things. So why don't you try and group all the animals we see in the intertidal into different categories?
Alright, Steph, I think I can do that. Should I group them based on what they look like, or maybe like where they are, or what they eat?
I think we should focus on what they eat, because today we want to focus on biotic interactions. So that's the interactions between different animals.
Alright, let's do it.
Let me get you started. Do you remember what all these are?
I think they were barnacles, right?
Yeah, these are barnacles. And do you remember how barnacles feed?
Maybe we should ask the kids.
Yeah.
Steph, I think last week you did this action that really helped me remember how barnacles eat. Do you guys remember? Remember Steph was going like this? So these are those little legs that the barnacles attach their head to a rock, and their little legs are filtering through the water. So the way that barnacles eat, we group them as filter feeders. And can you guys remember another type of filter feeder? Mussels. Let's go check a mussel out. Alright guys, so remember our mussels, right? We can see a few of them here embedded into our barnacles. So they are also part of that filter feeding group. But rather than having little legs that collect, they instead are like little vacuums. So they'll open up and suck in water. And as they suck in that water, they filter out all of the little plankton and eat them. And that's how they feed. Okay, so we have one category so far. We have the filter feeders. But let's try and think of another category to group some more living things. I am going to say our next category is going to be the grazers. So the grazers are going to be just like what they sound like. They graze the rocks and they scrape off the algae and eat it up. So everywhere I look around me right now, every single rock that I stare at, I see little snails. So these guys are a part of the grazer category.
So the snails have a very special shaped tongue. It's like sandpaper. It's called a radula, and they scrape it along the rocks, and that helps them pick up all the little algae that they want to eat.
Do you know any other species that are grazers?
Ooh, I do, Steph. I know that limpets and chitons are also grazers. I found a really cool tide pool with a few of them. Let's go check it out. Alright guys, here we are, the really cool tide pool that's gonna hold a bunch of sweet grazers. So let's take a look. Alright, do you guys see those two there? I mean, one is a mussel, however, we're focusing on the chitin right beside it. So these guys here are grazers, but let's have another look around. Do you guys see all those little things that look like little hats? Here, we'll zoom up real close on one. These are limpets, and as well, they graze around the rocks, pulling off algae, using their radula to scrape and eat. Whoa! Steph, check out these little ball guys! They look so cool!
Yeah, this is a kind of seaweed, and so is this. We have 3 different types of seaweed. Green, red, and brown. These ones also have floats. You can tell this one's kind of squishy. If you listen closely, you can hear the air, or you can even pop them. And same with these, they've got air inside these bubbles, and so that air acts like a float. So when the tide comes in, it lifts all these fronds up, helps them spread out so they can maximize their photosynthesis. That's how they collect energy from the sun.
Wow, Steph, I kind of forgot that, yeah, seaweeds are a living thing. Seaweeds have to eat also. It kind of seems like we could put them in another category. They make their own food, right? You said that they photosynthesize.
Yeah, that's right, Taylor.
Oh.
They use the sun's energy to make their food.
Cool. Okay, so we got another category. Let's go check some more out. Whoa, Steph, check it out. I'm standing under the ocean, or about to be. But normally, guys, remember all this stuff is submerged. But when the tide's way out, all of the seaweeds are out in the open for us to explore and check out. There's so many different kinds. This group of living organisms has such a big variety. It is so diverse. How about you teach us a few seaweeds, Steph?
Yeah, sure. So this is sea lettuce, a green seaweed. It's very different from this one, which is a true plant. This is surf grass, but this one is an algae. And Taylor, is that one attached down there?
No, Steph, I totally can grab it.
Sweet. This is a red algae. This one is all bumpy.
What's that one called again? A towel of some sort?
Yeah, Turkish towel.
Right on. And what's the last category? Oh, Steph, would this be the last category?
Yeah, that's a brown seaweed.
I know this one. I think it's called giant kelp, right?
Yep, that's right.
Cool.
You can see lots of it growing out underwater here. That's what makes the kelp forests.
Wow, Steph, I'm so happy that we now can group our seaweeds into a feeding group as well. So let's review. Remember, we have 3 different feeding categories so far. So our first one was those filter feeders. Our second one was the grazers. And now this third is those that make their food by themselves. So those that photosynthesize.
Hey Taylor, what you looking for there?
Oh, Steph, I'm trying to find one of my favorite intertidal species. I'm trying to find some little crabs. I wonder what category crabs would fit into. Steph, maybe we should find one and have a closer look.
I'm gonna try and pick this guy up. Oh, you know what? It's either dead or a molt. But this is a great opportunity to take a close look. So crabs have exoskeletons. So their skeleton is on the outside of their body. And when they want to grow bigger, what they do is they take off their skeleton, basically. Their soft body comes out, they open up at the back right here, pull their body out, and then they leave this molt on the beach.
Okay, Steph, so talking about, you know, how things eat, what they eat, what about crabs? What's up with them?
So crabs, they've got these sharp pinchers right here. And they have a bunch of moving mouth parts right in here. It's hard to see, but they're super tiny and they move back and forth. So it's like they have tiny little legs that are in their mouth, and they use all of these claws to grab things, rip them apart. So they could rip apart algae, or even if there's a dead fish, or if they wanted to eat a snail, any kind of meat they could try and eat in the intertidal. So they're gonna just feed on whatever they happen to find. That's what makes them a scavenger.
All right.
Okay, Taylor, this is why I love the intertidal. We have an example of food for scavengers, so come on over and take a look. Do you see this big white thing here?
Yeah, Steph, what is that?
That is a dead chitin. Chitins fit in our group with the
snails,
grazers.
right?
Yeah, the snails. So usually this would be a dark red color on the back, but it's been here for a while. It's probably gotten tossed around by the waves and worn away, and it's probably been munched on by some scavengers. So this is exactly the kind of thing the crabs would eat. This is a really cool opportunity to see the inside of a chitin. This one is a gumbo chitin, so they're very big in size, and so that's also helpful for us to see all the different parts. So inside a chitin, they have these different plates, and these are their shells, and they're just inside their body. And if you took one of the plates out, this one fell out. Yeah, it looks like that. And they sort of stack together, and they articulate. It's a lot like a wood bug that you'd find in your backyard, but these guys live in the intertidal.
Okay, so we have one final feeding group for you guys. And this one deals with those critters that eat other critters. So they're referred to as the predators. And the rest of our lesson today is going to really focus on these predator-prey interactions. Because these interactions are what kind of influence where a lot of species are found in the intertidal, and also why a lot of species look the way they do through their evolutionary adaptations. So when you guys think of a typical predator, what images come to mind? Maybe you think of like a really big animal. Maybe this animal has really sharp teeth and crazy kind of looking claws. However, in our intertidal zone, our top predators don't look anything like this. They're going to be things like sea stars and anemones, which is pretty cool to think about. Hey Steph, how about you teach us a little bit more about this category?
So we have two anemones right here. These are green surf anemones. You can see they're exhibiting their behavior in the intertidal zone, what's typical of them. So we've got a tide pool right here, keeping them nice and moist. They're on the underside of the rock to hide from the sun. This one is a little bit more open right now because it's a little bit more wet. And if I touch this anemone, what do you think is going to happen?
He's going to close up.
Let's see. Felt kind of sticky.
Oh, he's closing. So you're telling me that these guys are predators, right, Steph?
Yes.
So how do they eat?
So they use those stinging, sticky tentacles to catch their food. So some anemones like to eat things like fish. There's even one called the fish-eating anemone. And some will eat smaller things like plankton. They're using those stinging cells they have in their tentacles to catch that food and bring it into their mouth, which is in the very middle of their body here. Their mouth is right there.
Those little booger guys eat fish? That's crazy.
So we've talked about 5 different feeding groups. Can you name them? Filter feeders, grazers, photosynthesizers, scavengers, predators.
Okay guys, so those are our 5 feeding groups, and every species that you find in the intertidal is going to be fitting into one of those 5 groups. However, I'm most interested in the predators. Hey Steph, do you think we could go and find a predator in action?
Yeah, let's go take a look.
So Taylor, was there a predator specifically that you wanted to find?
Steph, you know I'm so interested in sea stars. Do you think we could learn more about them?
Yeah, for sure. Let's go take a look for some sea stars.
Are you sea star?
Taylor found one!
It's pretty windy and exhausting.
Oh, there's 2.
Sea stars have a few different adaptations that make them really good predators. They have sticky tube feet, which are really strong and help them hang onto rocks and withstand waves crashing onto those rocks. They can also open up a mussel shell and eat the inside of the mussel. These features make sea stars keystone species. Do you guys know what that means?
Keystone species are species that have a big impact on their environment, even if there's only a few of them. Sea stars are a great example of keystone species. A few sea stars will have a large effect on the number and location of species in the intertidal zone. Let me show you what I mean. Here we have a rocky shore with a low tide zone and a high tide zone. Above the high tide zone, we have predators like birds, and it's dry, so not many marine species want to live there. Just below high tide, we have barnacles. They only like to be a little bit wet. Below, we have mussels. They need to be wet about half the time. We also have a sea star. This one likes to be underwater even more than the mussels. Any mussels that try to grow down here get eaten up by the sea star. So it's rare to see any mussels in the low intertidal. That's why at Cox Bay we see a band of mussels on the rocks. So what we're seeing is a few sea stars having a big impact on their environment. A keystone species in action.
Matt, I had no idea that sea stars were so important for the ecosystem. That's crazy what they do. But Steph, what about other animals? How do other animals adapt to not be caught by predators or to catch their prey?
That's a good question, Taylor.
Hey guys, can you think of anything? What kind of adaptations do intertidal species have to survive their biotic interactions?
Let's do a little experiment. Let's see what happens when we sneak up on this tide pool.
All right, let's do it, Steph. Let's sneak away.
Let's see anything. Did you see anything happen when I snuck up on it?
There was like a little bit of fish action, but it kind of quieted down right away.
Yeah, you're right, Taylor. So when we sneak up slowly, quietly, and don't make a lot of shadows, the animals stay pretty still, because staying still helps their camouflage work. But if you make a big shadow, you might see some things dart around because they think a predator's coming.
Cool, so things have adapted to avoid predator interactions just by hiding.
Exactly.
All right, guys, check it out. If we walk through this little tide pool here, you see those little guys scooting around? Those are little baby sculpin, and there's a bunch of them. And to hide from me, the big bad predator, they're all scooting underneath this rock, taking cover. Go, baby sculpin, go.
So some species use their sense of sight to detect predators, but others use their sense of touch. See, here we have a snail, and I'm going to pull it off this kelp very gently. It's actually sticking on quite strongly. If I poke the snail's skin, though, it closes right up, and it has a trap door to keep predators out. So it's using its sense of touch to sense that I'm near and I'm trying to maybe eat it, and then it pulls its soft body into its protective shell.
Wow, so there's so many different adaptations that species here in the intertidal have. They use their sense of sight and their sense of touch. But does this follow a trend, Steph? What about sense of smell?
So a really cool example of sense of smell or taste in the intertidal is sea cucumbers and sunflower sea stars. So sunflower sea stars are the predator and the sea cucumbers are the prey. And when that sunflower sea star exudes a little bit of its body juices into the water, it sends out a chemical signal. It's got its own smell or taste. So an experiment has been done where they take a sea cucumber and put it in a container of regular old seawater. And if you drop in a little bit of seawater that's been flavored with that sea star smell, the sea cucumber will sense that smell and start to gallop frantically, trying to get away from the scent, because that scent means predator. So another cool thing about those sea cucumbers is that when a predator threatens them, they can eviscerate their guts, which means they just puke up all of their internal organs.
What? So to avoid predators, they just throw up a bunch?
Yeah, but they're getting rid of all their internal organs, and they do that to distract the predator. It's kind of like, here, I'm really gross, or maybe you want to eat my organs, and I'll just crawl away and regrow all of my intestines and stomach and everything. So we've talked a lot about snails and crabs, and they have a hard outer shell to protect them from predators. Sea urchins take it to the extreme because they have a hard shell that's covered in spines. making them not very appetizing for a lot of predators.
Yeah, that'd be extremely hard to eat. So can anything actually eat an urchin then?
Yeah, I know of 2 species that eat urchins. One is a sea otter. To get into that hard, spiny shell, sea otters will use a tool, like a rock, to crack through and get at the juicy insides.
And what's the second one?
Wolf eels are a kind of fish, and they are super tough. They won't use any tools or anything to break into the sea urchin. They just have a really strong inside of their mouth. It's really tough, so they just chomp down on that sea urchin whole.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh man, Steph, that was so cool.
I know, marine biology is fascinating. So I've saved the best animal adaptation for last. This animal is squishy, it can sting its prey, its tentacles have a special poison, but to us it just feels sticky. Do you know what it is? You guys got it! It's an anemone. Right here we have 2 anemones. This one is actually eating something. You can see there's a little snail that's gotten caught in the tentacles and is being carried towards that anemone's mouth.
Whoa, what about this guy?
This guy looks like he's still nice and cool and wet in the shade here. And when the tide comes back in, it'll stick its tentacles all the way out, ready to catch some food.
All right, Steph, you said that these are the coolest adaptations. What makes them so cool?
These guys have a special organ called a cnidocyte, and this helps them avoid predators and catch their prey. They fit into a special group called cnidarians.
Whoa, Steph, that's a lot of different terms.
Yeah, those are kind of big words. You know what? Why don't I draw it for you?
Cnidarians are a special group that includes anemones, jellies, and even corals. They all have special cells called cnidocytes. Cnidocytes are tiny and found all over an anemone's tentacles. If we zoom up on a cnidocyte, we see it has a nematocyst. The nematocyst has a trigger on the outside, and inside there is a curled up thread. If something activates the trigger, the thread will launch out really fast. The sharp barb on the end of the thread impales and can inject poison into the prey. For large animals, it may just feel sticky, but for small prey, this can be deadly. Ouch!
So different anemones have different types of harpoons and poisons in those harpoons. So some are good at attacking tiny, tiny plankton, and some are good at attacking bigger things like fish. So when we touch these anemones, usually all we feel is sticky because those harpoons are barely thick enough to go through our skin and they don't have a lot of poison. There are some anemones that some people are allergic to. When they touch them, they'll actually get an itchy reaction, kind of like a bee sting. And that's because that poison is something that these people are a little bit sensitive to. So when you're touching anemones, it's always a good idea to touch only a little bit with your pinky finger, just in case you're allergic to that sting.
You know, Steph, there's just so much diversity. Anywhere you step, everywhere in the Intertidal, something's living. And I'm really curious, how they all learned to live together. We know that they eat on different things, but how do they share the space? Where did that all start? Bet you my friend Mark knows. Let's go ask him. Hey, Mark. Hey, Mark.
Oh, hey, Taylor.
Just out here in the Intertidal again, are you, Mark?
Taylor, I can't get enough. I am just having a ball. We've got some great tides, amazing weather, and for me, this is a place where I can just rekindle and reawaken my love for biology and ecology and animals. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was just be in nature and be with animals. And coming down to the Intertidal, you can't beat it.
You know, Mark, the thing that really throws me about the Intertidal is just the amount of life. Look at this rock beside you. There's so many things living.
That's what I love about it. You can read about evolution, you can read about ecology, you can read about nature. You come down to the intertidal zone and it's all right here. This is like an open textbook. You can learn so much about how animals have evolved, how animals have adapted, how animals interact. Coming down to the intertidal zone is like a crash course in science. You're totally right. It looks like the rock is literally alive. We've already talked about zonation, you know, all these different layers from the seaweed and the barnacles, and then you come down, you've got limpets and all these black turban snails and different species of seaweed, and then by the time you get down to this tide pool, we've got sponges and crabs and bryozoans and all kinds of different stuff going on. But what's really cool with all of this life jammed into this tiny area is the conflict and the competition. Every single animal in this habitat, in this ecosystem, is like a piece of a puzzle, and it's a constant struggle to get enough food to survive, to be able to reproduce, and also to stay safe. Everything is trying to eat everything else. Everything is trying to avoid being eaten. Everything is fighting for space. And that creates the kind of conditions that really drive species to develop some fascinating adaptations.
Adaptations, you say? Hey, Mark? Steph and me were really talking about a lot, but what else do you got to add?
You know, every living thing has to adapt, right? That's what natural selection and sexual selection are all about. It's the forces that kind of shape how successful a species is at reproducing and at surviving. And so these adaptations are little tricks of the trade that different species have evolved over time in order to make them more effective. So, like, just freestyling here. Let's look at this seaweed, right? This is fucus or rockweed. Today's actually an interesting day. You come down to the intertidal on a day like today, the sun's roasting, and you can see that this seaweed's like pretty crispy dry. But as soon as you flip it over, it's still stayed moist and wet. And if you look, each one of these little leaves is actually filled with like a little bit of, it's almost like jelly, like a gel. And so this lets the seaweed retain a ton of moisture so that it never actually dries out, no matter how low the tide is, no matter how long it stays exposed, no matter how sunny it is. So even when the top bits get a little bit crispy, the underside is always going to stay nice and wet. Now, of course, if you're an animal that's living in this environment, in the intertidal, you might want to think, well, boy, I'd like to stay nice and wet too. And so this creates like a little micro habitat. If you flip up these little branches of fucus, you're going to see all kinds of little stuff. You've got all these limpets that are hiding here and staying moist. You've got black turban snails all over the place. Each one of these snails, look at this guy. Look at that. He's actually eating a barnacle. Obviously I picked that snail up at random. This is what I love about the intertidal. He's actually munching on something, so we'll let him be. But the point is that every single one of these organisms, these species, whether they're seaweeds, whether they're snails, invertebrates, vertebrates, whatever, they've all figured out like a little angle that they can work, a niche that they can fill. So, you know, when we talk about adaptations, they can really be anything. Like an adaptation is really just like a trick that something's learned. So in the case of a seaweed, you know, the fact that they're filled with this water retaining jelly, that's an adaptation. On the other hand, it can be something that's like a lot more sort of specific to an individual animal. So like, for example, all of these tide pools are just lousy with sculpins, right? These little tiny fish, they're absolutely everywhere. And sometimes you see them kind of hiding under the rocks or under seaweed and stuff like that, but they're also right out in the open because they're perfectly camouflaged. Until a sculpin moves, you're probably not going to see it. And just looking at some of the sculpin in this tide pool, I can see that some are almost totally black. Some are like this variegated pattern of like white and light green, and depending on where they are, they blend in perfectly with whatever's underneath them. And so these different fish have kind of evolved to reflect the colors and the patterns of the habitat that they live in. So if you were to go to like a white sandy beach, lots of shell, lots of crushed coral, you'd find sculpins that are mostly pale white color that are perfectly blending in with the habitat around them. You come to a beach like this one where you have lots of dark greens and dark browns and blacks, and that's what you're going to see. you're going to see the fish reflecting the habitat that they're living in, and they're perfectly camouflaged. But obviously you can't take a white fish and expect it to hide in, like, you know, this dark green area. And so you see this kind of flexibility, this plasticity in a lot of species, where depending on where they are, they can kind of change the way they look or even change the way they behave. So a lot of the time it's easy to sort of see how animals have evolved adaptations. A lot of them are behavioral, or they're very visible, they're immediately apparent. But if you think about a lot of these seaweeds, like the fucus that we already talked about, they're doing the same thing in terms of trying to make sure that they can reproduce and survive. So if you're a seaweed, you don't have a lot of defenses against animals that want to eat you, i.e. half of the creatures in the intertidal zone. You're pretty helpless. Or are you? So the same way that the fucus evolved this jelly to stay fresh and moist, other seaweeds have evolved defenses to deter herbivores that would munch on them. So we've got like prionitis or bleachweed, and it's called bleachweed because basically it's got bleach in it, which is a pretty unappealing thing if you're an animal looking for a tasty snack. Other seaweeds, they have like glass crystals. So imagine trying to munch on a granola bar, but it's filled with broken glass. That's not very appealing, is it? Lots of the seaweeds in the intertidal, they've developed these unique defenses to keep themselves from getting eaten by other creatures. And I think that's pretty cool. It's like a more subtle, restrained type of evolutionary adaptation, but it's no less interesting than something like exciting camouflage or a strong shell or, you know, powerful claws.
Wow, Mark, thanks for that great lesson. We'll see you around town.
Hey, for sure, Taylor. Glad I could help out.
Hey, Mark. Man, that ocean, so cool. I can't get over how intriguing the intertidal area is. Hope you guys enjoyed our video this week. We are still not done with the oceans. We are going to do one more video on ocean ecosystems next, so we hope that you join us on Tuesday next week for another Raincoast Field School at Home. As well, remember guys, we have our Raincoast challenge up on our website if you feel like you're in the mood to go explore and learn while you're doing it. Other than that, we'll see you guys back on Thursday during our Zoom session to go over some questions and answers for you. Enjoy the day.